Good evening, and first of all, thank you for taking time out and deciding to spend the next 90 minutes here with us. My name is Advait Kurlekar. My colleague here is Eklavya Malhotra, and we represent a consulting company called Apohan Management Consultants. As always, there are a lot of new faces, this time much more newer faces than what we have normally, which is always a good thing to have. So for people who have been attending this or attending this program for the first time, let me just give you a quick background in terms of what this is. So many years ago, we started this initiative called Between the Lines. It's a monthly, open for all, and as you now know, free session for everybody who cares to attend. Each month, we identify a book that we believe is a good book to read, more often than not, recently published book. And as some of you have been attending regularly, you know Eklavya does a fantastic summary of that book with or without reading the book. And then obviously every book has takeaways, learnings, knowledge. Our topics are different. So depending on the topic, normally we invite people from the industry, and I try and moderate a discussion on the topic, not on the book. Like many of you now know, we've been on a lucky roll here, and the third month in succession, where given the book and more importantly given the guest that we had, we said that we cannot divide attention with anybody else, and we did away with any panel discussion. Sorry. So a couple of months ago, we had Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan with the Tata book. Last month, we had Prahlad Kakkar with his own autobiography. And today, we have Neil Borate with his book on Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. And given that Neil himself is here, and I had a chat with him before, and we said that no, we don't want to have a panel discussion. We just want to have a lovely chat with him. So we'll do that. So like I said, we've been doing this for some time now. Today's session is session number 110. So we started off, thank you. So we started off in October 2017, and through COVID, I think 8 or 9 months when government did not allow in-person events, we had to go online. And the moment they said yes, I think December 2020 was the first session we went offline. Those were the days where everybody was in a mask, and we were told that not more than 25 people, because they thought it's a shadi, because that's what it was, 25 people allowed for a marriage, and only one side, so only 25 people. And they also told us that 25 people have to be seated in a hall that otherwise can take 100 people, so that social distancing, etc., etc. So through those thick and thin, we've continued. We thankfully never missed any session, and today is 110. So thank you once again. He's not here today, but let me first start by thanking Amit Paranspai, many of you know, because of which I got introduced to Neil, and he here is today. Let me thank Dr. Shikha Jain and Dr. Sanmat Shetty, both from IMDR faculty, who've been very gracious and partnered with us. And I don't know how many, but many. This must be the 20th time we are doing this session here. So thank you so much for their partnership. I would like to thank Rohan Builders for their partnership. I would like to thank National HRD Network. Aman is not here, but I believe Vandana was outside at least. Where is she? There she is. Okay. So thank you so much. So thank you again, once again, and over to Eklavya.
Thank you, Advait. So those of you who, like me and Advait, follow Neil on LinkedIn and the other social media platforms would be aware that at least once a week Neil goes viral. Last week Neil went to Sri Lanka, and then he went viral a couple of days ago when he put down his entire itinerary and how he managed to cover the journey. I think 11 days holiday in about 1.5 lakhs. So yeah, while we're not going to get into that during the conversation with him to understand what are the must-dos and must-sees, but I have to confess that one look at his itinerary and the entire breakup, the first thought that came to both Advait and myself was 55,000 rupees that he spent on shopping. How much of duty-free alcohol were you carrying, Neil? You could not have been getting tea from there worth 55,000 bucks. Yeah, 56. So Advait clearly has got the math right. So yeah, I think we all are familiar with Neil's work. He has made our life much simpler in the last few years by actually decoding and simplifying things which otherwise would be foreign territory, alien territory for most of us. And that again is not something which we're going to dwell too deep into today, because the purpose of today's discussion is first and foremost to pay homage in a way to Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, the big bull of Dalal Street. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to pick up this particular book and also this theme, because it's been nearly 2 years now since he's passed away. And one of the things which you might notice that even today, if you log on to any of the websites, the shopping portals like Amazon, Flipkart, and the others, and if you search for books on Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, there are very few definitive books about him. There are a lot of books in terms of, which seem to be like how to invest like him and those kind of, books which probably are a recipe for failure. But I think there are just a handful of books that have been written on him, and very few which actually have tapped into his wide network of associates, friends, and family members, the way Neil and his co-authors Aparajita and Aditya have managed to do in this book. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to actually pick up this book, because again, one of the things is that while all of us have, we probably hold him in high esteem, high regard. Most of us tend to believe a lot in the folklore of the man himself. And yes, we have made him out to be a legend. But reading the book also gives you a very insightful, behind-the-scenes glimpse into the man behind the myth. And also a very incisive account into what really shaped his approach and philosophies. And I'm saying his approach and philosophies not just limited to investing, but to life itself. So that's something which is quite intriguing and is, probably decoded a lot more in this book than other pieces of literature which have been penned on Mr. Jhunjhunwala while he was alive and definitely post his unfortunate young demise. But this particular book actually goes to great lengths to also dispel some of the myths around him. Just to give you an example, like I probably, similar to many of us in the room, believed that the entire story about him picking up Titan as a multi-bagger stock started off in the early 2000s when he picked it up at, I think, at 3 or 4 rupees a share. And then, of course, during his lifetime, it went up to 2,200 or something, or 2,300 rupees a share, and contributed greatly to his overall net worth, which was estimated at about, I think, 35,000 crores at the time of his demise. But the reality is that it did not really start off in 2002, 2003, as most of us have been led to believe, because that, of course, becomes very poetic, it becomes very inspiring, and that becomes the kind of stuff that you would like to speak about at, intellectual discussions that you have on the stock market, like most of us claim to do. The reality, like Neil has actually outlined in the book, is that Jhunjhunwala started picking the stock in the mid-80s itself, soon after Titan got registered and got listed. He actually started picking up the stock because he believed in the potential, and of course, like it keeps getting reiterated during the book, he had great respect and admiration for the for the corporate governance norms that the Tata Group upheld all throughout, and they continue to do so even now. So he was actually picking up stocks to the extent that within a very short span of time, even before the stock went through the bull run, he had actually overtaken Ratan Tata and the Tata Group in terms of the investment shareholding that he held. And this was at a time when he was relatively unknown in the stock markets also. He was definitely not the big bull as we knew him later on. At that point of time, Ratan Tata actually called for an emergency conclave with the rest of the management team and the Tata Registry Limited people to find out what could be the intentions behind this unknown person, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, who has been picking up stock in Titan. Does he have any hostile intentions towards it? Is this going to be like one of those, corporate raiders? So then Nimesh Kampani from JM Financial Services, he was nominated to be the person who will go and bell the cat and actually engage in a one-on-one with Jhunjhunwala and find out what his intentions were. And all of this makes for very dramatic reading, the way it is recounted in the book. And that's the time when, in a conversation with Kampani, Jhunjhunwala actually told him that, no, I believe in the inherent story of Titan. I believe in the potential which your company holds. And at the same time, I also believe in the structural reforms that India will undergo. So don't worry, I'm not going to short your stock. I'm not going to do anything which is going to harm the stock price or the company's fortunes. I'm going to be in it for the long run, and I will stick with you through thick and thin, which he did. Even when the stock price plummeted, even when Titan found out, to its great surprise, that competing in a market with HMT and Alvin is different to competing in a market where you have the Swiss brands and other luxury brands, and it's really not the same level playing field. You cannot really decimate the opposition like they had done in the Indian markets. And in spite of all of the setbacks that they had, Rakesh continued to repose his faith in them. He continued to assure that he will stick with them, he will not liquidate or he will not exit his positions. And then when the gold run finally happened, when we had the bullish run on the gold prices and when the stock recovered and then continued to soar throughout the early 2000s, that's when it started paying dividends for him. So all of this and much more gets illustrated in the book, which gives us basically a deep dive into what exactly made Jhunjhunwala think the way he was. Again, another thing. I think a lot of us subscribe to the belief, and it makes for a great party conversation, that look where Jhunjhunwala started from, 5,000 rupees initial investment, turned it into 35,000 crores at the time of his demise. It was not 5,000 rupees initial investment. That must have been the capital which he had in his account or to his name at that point of time. But he had actually borrowed from his brother, who was also a practicing chartered accountant. He had borrowed money from his brother's clients. He had raised about 20 lakhs. And then in the first year of his active trading on the Bombay Stock Exchange in 1986-87, that's when he converted that into a trading income of 25 lakhs. So as much as we would like to believe that Rakesh Jhunjhunwala could do no wrong and everything that he touched turned to gold, it's not necessarily how it actually panned out. And that is why this book makes for essential reading. Because sometimes it's also important to understand that Jhunjhunwala was mortal like the rest of us, but there was something which separated him from everybody else who was his contemporary. And that is the secret sauce which they have gone deep dived into and went to great lengths to try and decipher for all of us to understand. And that begins even with the smaller things, like his outlook towards life itself, and some of the things that he was perhaps known for famously and known for notoriously as well. So for instance, I don't think any of us can recount any anecdote or quotable quote from Jhunjhunwala which did not include a mention of Jeffries, his favorite pub, or Pretty Women, which I think was always something that he had a weakness for. And it's really hard to imagine how all of this would have been in today's environment of being politically correct and of saying the things, saying the right things or saying things which make for popular reading. But the reality is that Jhunjhunwala could not mince any words even if he tried. And that's again something which comes out so strongly in all of the anecdotes that they have shared in the book. And like one of the funniest things one of the things which I had never heard of, which was attributed to Jhunjhunwala, and it's a pretty surreal statement, is that he mentions that his father told him to become a chartered accountant so that he has some stability, some stable source of income in case his stock market shenanigans do not exactly pan out the way it did. And he says that in those days also, like a CA during the internship, those years of internship, so you would go in as a chartered accountant. After the internship, when you would get exploited for those couple of years, you would come out a shattered accountant. So that's again something which is on the humorous side of Jhunjhunwala's personality, which he was so famous for. And he also recounts that in those days, the way in which he could actually fund his daily poison of choice, which I'm assuming must not have been a single malt in those days at least, was by fudging his travel and local conveyance receipts and ensuring that instead of the $70 which he was spending in a month, he showed it as $150 so that, he could pocket the rest of the money and at least they could get drinks 4 times a month in those days. So these are some of the lesser known things which come out very vividly in terms of Jhunjhunwala's life, his personality. And another beautiful thing, like, the way I mentioned, of course, in jest, that he could not resist, like basically holding fort at Jeffries or talking about women in general, equating them to the stock market at times, especially the Bollywood actresses of the time. But the other thing which also stands out is that Jhunjhunwala probably in most of his public appearances could not complete a conversation without mentioning his parents, his wife, and his children multiple times. So, despite all that exterior, despite some of that abrasive personality which could have rubbed people the wrong way, he remained a family man to the very end. And in fact, he always used to say that, like, for instance, he stayed with his parents right up to the end, like up to the time they were there. And he always used to say that I stay with my parents and not that my parents stay with me, which again tells you a remarkable deal about the man's sort of mental makeup and the respect and reverence that he had towards his parents. Similarly, towards his wife, Rekha Jhunjhunwala, one of the things which comes out, again, a lesser known fact, is that while Rakesh himself probably did not hail from an extremely affluent family, but Rekha certainly did, and she was used to the luxuries of life before she married him. And after marriage, she of course had to settle for a much more middle class kind of a lifestyle, which did not entail things like traveling around in cars and so on and so forth. But there was one thing which she had demanded from him, that when you do end up making money, get me an air conditioner in my bedroom. Because that was something which she was so used to from from a young age. And we always talk about how he went long on the 1990 Mandu Dandavate budget during the VP Singh government, and people often talk about the fact that he converted 2.5 crores of net worth into 25 crore overnight, literally, within the space of a few days or a few hours. What is also not known is that the first thing that he did, like after the budget announcement, when all his bets paid off, was that he got an AC installed for his wife, because he had promised her that the day I make good enough money, I'll get you an air conditioner in the bedroom. And he fulfilled that promise to her first and foremost. And similarly, the kind of devotional love that he had towards his children, which probably was his biggest regret, that he had often said that he wanted to spend a sizable number of years seeing his children grow up. And unfortunately, he did not get the chance to do that, possibly because the kind of exceptional and exemplary discipline that he showed towards both trading and investing, he was not really able to demonstrate that in his personal life when it came to his health and habits. So despite a long struggle with, whether it was with drinks or with the kind of things that he was consuming or with taking care of his physical health, despite trying multiple times, even checking into hospitals so that he could stay away from alcohol, totally abstain from it, he just could not kick off the habit. And that's probably one of the reasons which often gets attributed to his relatively early demise. But then again, we come to the crux of it, which the book beautifully captures in terms of the differentiation between Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, the investor, and the trader. So while the 1990s saw him earn the moniker of being the big bull of Dalal Street, and he also had the grudging respect of none other than maybe the original big bull, which was Harshad Mehta. That's the 90s, or maybe the late 80s, early 90s, was that time when he really made his name in the markets, more through trading than investing. That's when he used to go short. And again, he did that, I think, he basically did that, I think, in terms of, was it during the Tata Power? I think in the Sisa Goa. So during those chapters, like during those early picks, when he was able to trade them effectively, that basically cemented his position in the market and earned him that sort of a name to be reckoned with. But even those, if you really look back at it, many others must have also entered these stocks, the markets, at the same time, done the same moves, but not too many of them would have exited at the right time. So while everybody talks about his timing and his innate ability to pick the stocks at the right price, very little is actually known about how he managed to exit these, and often even at a loss. And also often just in a desperate attempt to keep his word. Like if he has shorted, if he's given his word, like he used to say that my father has told me, your word has to be your bond if you're going to dabble in these markets. He remained absolutely true to that, much to the surprise of his fellow traders and other brokers alike, who would wonder that why is he not making use of the inefficiencies, the glaring inefficiencies that existed in the markets back then. But he refused to do that because he had a very steady approach towards investing or trading, and very few have probably been able to balance the two of those. I think there's a quote in the book which is attributed to Harshad Mehta, who states that 99% of traders who decide to go into investing eventually become bankrupt. And Rakesh is the only person who has managed to actually stem that tide and is able to keep both at arm's length and be equally successful in both. And this further gets exemplified to his simple approach of maintaining different books for both his investing and for his trades. All investing was done in the name of the enterprise, and all trading was done either in his own individual name or his wife's name. Never did the two get mixed up with each other. And then again, the other part of the book is that it also sheds light in terms of the so-called mistakes that Jhunjhunwala made in terms of the stock picks. So there is a detailed analysis of, I think there are about 6 companies that Neil and his co-authors have deep dived into as part of the book and their research. So they are basically 3 picks which really sort of changed the market altogether, and 3 picks where Jhunjhunwala actually suffered losses, and those also became equally the talk of the town. So whether it is CRISIL, Lupin, Titan as the stocks that made it multifold big, at the same time they've also given us what really happened when it came to the ones that did not do so well. So whether it is Mandana Retail Ventures, which was, I think, associated with the Being Human brand of Salman Khan, or also A to Z, which was A to Z Online, the A to Z maintenance. And I think maybe there is one more in the book, DHFL. Yeah, Bilker is not mentioned. So somehow Pune has managed to keep its name out of the book for some reason. Yeah, maybe Anil can shed some light on that. But DHFL also finds a not so honorable mention in the book in terms of stock picks that did not perform as expected. And the beauty of the book is, especially like I can see there are a lot of students over here, I'm presuming most of them would be pursuing finance studies. So the beauty of these 6 chapters in itself is the absolutely fundamental financial and technical analysis that they have done, which really should be the gold standard for anybody who is looking to get into how to analyze a company purely on the basis of fundamentals. Forget about doing technical analysis, forget about doing anything in terms of stock price movement, but when you talk about the basics of financial analysis which need to be in place before you decide to park your money somewhere, all 6 of these chapters make for compulsory reading. And that's something which is, again, I would say remarkably different in this book, that they have not shied away from calling a spade a spade. In fact, I think for me personally, the most insightful topic or the most insightful thing that they've covered in this book is probably the last chapter itself, which is things that you should not learn from Jhunjhunwala. Things that we probably hold him in great regard for, like leverage. Reading the book, it's almost like a roller coaster. You know how it ends, but you get so scared thinking that what if this guy had gotten it all wrong? You remember I spoke about, I alluded to the fact that he was borrowing money from his brother's clients. In those days, he was offering them returns which were like double what FD returns were in those days. So if FD return was 10 lakhs, he was borrowing 5 lakhs from somebody and offering them 24% return, just so that he could play the markets. It is absolutely not advisable for anybody to mimic what Jhunjhunwala used to do, because there is a reason why there has been nobody else like him. And yes, a lot of it can probably get attributed to luck also. There has to be some element of luck which goes into play when you see the number of times in the book where Neil has described how close he came to bankruptcy. So whether it was during the Harshad Mehta scam in 92, when they were extremely bullish in the beginning, but they managed to turn bearish at the right time when they realized that this is an artificially inflated market. So yes, he made huge gains during that time, but he also managed to pare his losses because he realized quickly early on that something doesn't seem to be right in this market, and they managed to get out of the counters which were basically being manipulated by Harshad Mehta and the other conspirators. So all of this is something which, like they say, can only be done under adult supervision. Do not try this at home. So if you're going to pick up a copy of the book today, and if you're going to say that, okay, now let's wait for Monday morning, Guru Nanak Jayanti done, with divine intervention, I'm going to enter the markets as one of the lakhs of retail investors, and I'm going to put some of these learnings, some of these applications, some of these principles to the test. Do not do that. Stick to what Jhunjhunwala says. Take a mutual fund. Don't go into small cap funds. Now we say Titan, Crisil, Lupin, and we say these names with so much weight behind them. But let's not forget that when Jhunjhunwala was picking these stocks, when he was buying them in lots of 10,000s and more, these were all small cap companies. Nobody should be investing the way he was doing, and you definitely should not be trading the way he was doing. Because the kind of leverage that he was okay with, and he himself has said this, and I think a lot of us would have also watched that seminal interview of his at Flame Campus, I think about 10, 11 years ago, where he pretty much basically laid out his entire life for public consumption. Over there also he repeatedly says that what I could get away with, none of you have a chance of getting away with it. And that is purely down to the fact that he managed to simplify something which is so complex because he looked at it differently, he viewed things differently, he understood his risk appetite. He was always very clear that I will only go as far as my leverage allows me to. He had a threshold fixed for himself, and no matter how much there was a positive upside to it. And that is why somebody like him, can you imagine, everybody in the book who has been interviewed says that you walk into his office and you could see his entire portfolio on the computer screen. He never made any attempts to hide anything. He in fact went to great lengths to advise his friends which stocks they should pick, at what price. I'm not sure if he would tell them what time they should exit, at what price. That must have been the Jhunjhunwala secret sauce. But there are multiple people today who probably owe a lot to Jhunjhunwala and his stock tidbits and advice that he must have shared with them. And the last thing which I want to leave you with on a totally separate note, which actually doesn't get covered in the book, but was shared by somebody, one of Advait's mentors, when we mentioned that we are actually convening this program with Neil. So he said that he's an alum from IIM Ahmedabad, and many years ago he had started this NGO along with a few of his batchmates called IIM Impact, so Impact with a double I. And it's an NGO which basically aims to provide education to girls, to young girls. And during that time, they had approached multiple donors, one of them being Jhunjhunwala, and he had made a donation to them of 1 crore with the caveat saying that use this entire money only to fund your general and administrative expenses, so that every other rupee which comes to you by way of donation can actually go to this noble cause of girls' education, and you will never have to stop your purpose, your actual fight for girls' education on account of scarcity of administrative funds. And he continued to support them for a couple of decades after that. And it was always, something which he believed very strongly in. And in fact, he was probably one of the first Indian, should I say, entrepreneurs who was part of the Giving Pledge. The Giving Pledge, which has gained so much worldwide recognition and acclaim, has very few participants from India, unfortunately. Jhunjhunwala was among the first of them. And while he might have a lot of unfulfilled promises, dreams, and ambitions at the time when he passed away, at least one of them could not have been this one where he had said that he will pledge to give away 25% of his wealth. And like he said, that there was, I think, a quote attributed to Mother Teresa, give until it hurts. He truly did that. And that is something which probably does not get as much recognition as it should, and rightly so. So if you want to read more about these things, and again I warn you, do not get swayed by the title of the book and everything. Try as we may, unlikely any of us in this room is going to become the next big bull of Dalal Street. So it's better to proceed with caution. Pick up this book if you really want to understand what exactly made this man the mythical legend and part of folklore that he is today, and also to understand more about the simple approaches which all of us can also adopt when it comes to just viewing businesses and critically evaluating them in the future. So for that, we are thankful to Neil and his co-authors for providing us this genuine, insightful look into Rakesh Jhunjhunwala's life. And to continue more of this discussion, we move on to the main feature of today's session, the one-on-one with Neil and Advait. Thank you all so much.
So, quick introduction. Born and brought up in Pune, Punyaचा मुलगा. Did his law and economics from Symbiosis, then went on to do his masters in investment from University of Birmingham. Worked, those were the days of anything was tech like today, and therefore he worked for a couple of years in fintech. Moved to NCR, did work with value research for a couple of years, and then came back to Mumbai and joined Mint. And within now 5 years, he's moved from as a joining position to deputy editor, now to editor personal finance in Mint. So, and of course, he's passed his CFA level 1. So, we'll talk about why only level 1. But welcome, Neil Balari. So Neil, since we already talked about the book, I still want to ask you a few questions about the book. This book got published nearly 9-10 months after he passed away. So why did you decide to sort of do a compilation of his various articles and interviews? Did the thought occur after he passed away to all of you, or was the planning before? And you've not really interviewed him directly. So what went through that journey?
So before I answer that, just to first answer the question on Sri Lanka, I did not do 55,000 rupees of shopping. That includes taxis. My father's in the audience. I gave him a tea box. So I don't want him to think that I did 55,000 rupees of alcohol. And fantastic introduction. In fact, that's better than I've done so far in all of the programs around my book. So thank you so much. In terms of what made us start, so yes, we did begin after he passed away. In fact, the day he passed away is when Penguin called us. And I think there were a couple of different thoughts. One was to record everything before memory fades. Already people, young folks who are in the market may not know him, may not know of him. And that seemed the right time to capture that. And I think it was just the right time in terms of people wanting to read about him. The death itself had created a lot of news about him.
Okay, but a lot of preparation would have gone because so much was written about him, so much his own articles. So how did you choose what goes in, what doesn't go in, kind of thing?
So it was a strange problem to be faced with because there was a lot of material, like too much. Like sometimes you find difficulty getting material about somebody. In his case, it was tons and tons of
the other way around. Okay.
Yeah, the other way around. Luckily, I had two very good co-authors. It wasn't just me. So Aprajita is a fellow journalist. Aditya Kondawar now works for a wealth management firm. He used to analyze stocks. Even today, he does some great IPO analysis. So we kind of collectively decided on what should go in, but we have our domains of expertise. So Aditya focused on the stock analysis part, and Rajat and I focused on the man mode.
Okay. Talking about the man, the next big bull after Harshad Mehta, but was his personality, a kind of thing, and like Eklavya said, the kind of statements he made, was he larger than life? And did that mean that he overshadowed some other people who might have been, if not equal, if not better, at least equally well in the stock market and have done good things about?
In some ways, yes. So I don't know how many people here know of Chandrakant Sampath. He was sort of the guru who preceded Rakesh. In fact, many people, including Rakesh, thought of Sampath as a mentor. So there are people like that. In fact, there are people today who I think are of that stature or of that caliber, but they are not. They don't have the personality. So, for example, the late, actually, sorry, not so. In this case, it's the late Parag Parekh.
Yeah.
Again, a value investor, but tremendous legacy. Like to this date, his mutual fund is just so successful, and Rajiv Thakkar, who now manages it, has carried on that legacy.
Okay. Now, take us through your own journey now. More than the book now about you and your views. So, after law, how did you decide to get into investments, not practice law? Then came CFA. How did that thought process happen?
So again, thanks to my parents. They are doctors and they used to pepper me with questions about investment even when I was studying law. And I thought that maybe I should just study this properly. So I took a huge detour in my career. I did a second degree. I went abroad, I studied economics. Then I came back. I wanted to be a financial advisor and I worked with one for a while. Unfortunately, at that time, the pay was not great. And that's something that affects the profession even now in terms of financial advisors who are SEBI registered, that it's a very small profession. So that's where I transitioned on to a writing role, because Value Research, which is sort of the top website for mutual funds, they had a vacancy. And I applied, and since then I've been writing about personal finance.
But you have obviously very high regard for Dhirendra Kumar. Tell us about your 3 years there and how, as a mentor, as a boss, what went there?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Dhirendra Kumar is sort of the godfather of the mutual fund industry. He's been writing about it since the early 90s. He would literally compile snippets from the Economic Times on the NAV prices, put it all, record it all with him, and eventually he built this website, Value Research, which even today guides thousands of investors, and it's very rigorous. It's not there to attract eyeballs. It's there for serious study, and he's never compromised on integrity. There are a lot of today people out there in finance who will do anything for a quick buck, but Dhiren has never ever done that.
And what kind of learnings happened in those 3 years of research, back-end research kind of thing, and how did it then help you shape your career in journalism?
So Dhiren has a very clear-cut philosophy when it comes to investing in mutual funds. He believes in diversified, boring mutual funds, not the sector bets that you get to hear about now and then. There will be some Make in India fund, there will be EV fund, there will be this fund, that fund. A lot of marketing gets thrown around. Dhiren is very clear that you need to pick a good diversified fund and let that fund manager do the job of picking the sectors or picking the stocks. You don't get into that. So this is just one of the many principles that he follows. So I think today my outlook is massively governed by that.
And how did Mint happen?
Through Twitter.
Okay.
So my former boss at Mint used to follow me on Twitter, and I was very outspoken. So one day she just randomly messaged me that, do you want to join? And it was a bit of a dream for me. So I accepted that without even negotiating.
You still repent for that?
Well, at least in the initial years, yes, I might have.
No, that's okay. So, again, that was back from NCR to Mumbai. And how did you pick up what you eventually started doing in terms of, what sectors to cover or what kind of interviews you're doing, whom to track? How did that happen?
So I head the personal finance team, which we are responsible for the personal finance page in Mint. It's a daily page, Monday to Friday. and our zone of operation is everything that affects an individual's finances. So it can be traditional in terms of which mutual funds to invest in, or it can be like we did a story on what does it cost to raise a baby today, like what does the first year of parenthood cost, and we talk to actual parents and we put that out there. So anything that involves money, which credit card to pick, how much does travel cost, all of that we cover.
Okay. But was there any specialization eventually that happened for you, or was it like entire gamut of personal finance because you're running the page?
So I was hired as a mutual fund reporter, but then suddenly the pandemic came about, and my boss quit and half the team quit. So they had no choice but to promote me, and so I never got a chance to really specialize in any one field. I had to take care of the whole thing.
But what would you like to?
No, it is good to be a generalist because
Even in today's world?
mainly because you don't get bored of yourself. Matlab, if you write the same thing every day, you only get bored. Whereas luckily for me, one day I can talk about babies, and the other day I can talk about credit cards. So it's fun.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about ethical practices at Value Research, and you've been sort of a crusader. I won't say an enemy, but a crusader against, for transparency of what is now called finfluencers. Tell us about that. How did that happen? And we'll talk about Mr. Hegde as well.
So if you think about the rise of influencers or finfluencers, this is largely a pandemic phenomenon, right? We were all stuck at home, and suddenly these social media apps, they exploded, YouTube, Insta, and suddenly these individuals whose main strength was the ability to create interesting content, engaging content, amassed huge amounts of followers and huge amounts of power, because when you have a lot of followers, you influence crores, you influence the lives of thousands of people, lakhs of people, without any responsibility on you. I mean, you have no direct relationship with the person who's following you, and often you rise to the top in these cases by putting out extremely clickbaity things. Like, people aren't going to watch your video if you say, do this sip, and if things go right, maybe in 5 years you will get a 12% return. If you say that by 30, follow this, you'll become a crorepati, that video will do well. That's how algorithms are. And so you had this amassing of power without responsibility, and that created a systemic problem. And when you have power, you have money funding you. So a lot of these guys were funded by brokers, because brokers discovered that there is this huge interest in the stock market. So they developed this model where each video has a link, an affiliate link it's called. You click on that, and every single trade that you do, the influencer gets a cut of that trade, of that commission. And you as the client, you don't even know, and you don't know why this guy is creating the next video on, oh, buy this stock, will go up 100%, because it's in his interest to keep you trading. So thankfully, SEBI later on sort of took note of all of these issues, and they have been active on this. So now things are slowly getting regulated, and I'm hopeful.
Would you take credit for that? Without being so humble.
I mean, the influencers have given us credit for it, so we often get attacked. So, in a sense, yes. I've also served on 2 SEBI committees, which we advise SEBI on what regulations to frame. But it was the need of the hour. I mean, if we hadn't done it, somebody else would have.
But you made it very clear that you're not against influencers. It was just in terms of the transparency and whether they are licensed to do that. And then you went and met Mr. Hegde as well.
Sharon Hegde. Okay,
Sharon.
so yes, so it's not that we're against, because we can't be, right? Freedom of speech. Any citizen of India has that right to get up and say what they want to. And I, as a journalist, would be the last person to say, I'm stopping your freedom of speech. That would just go against everything I stand for. Now, coming to Sharon Hegde, most of you would know Finance with Sharon. He's one of India's largest financial influencers. I think he has 6 million followers on Instagram. Um, and he came to his claim to fame was doing a lot of entertaining content. He would do skits and uh, fun stuff. Fun, people like to be entertained, so he gave people that. Now, the problem with that model is ultimately how do you monetize? So at some point he took a investment advisor license in a different firm because ultimately you have to charge people fees, and for that you need a license. But the moment you take a license, there are rules about what you can and can't say. Then you can't go around making a video saying, haha, buy this stock, it's going to go up 10 times. So that was the crux of my critique of him, my engagement with him.
But as an investment advisor, am I not supposed to say that, haha, buy this stock?
I mean, you have to say it with the correct disclaimers, there's a code, there's a SEBI advertising code that you have to adhere to.
But there was also this issue in terms of, he tried to justify that, the entities are different and I'm a person and that's an entity, and you went against that and you actually met him as well.
Yes, I met him. So in that process, we also talked about how much money he makes, which is 50 crores a year, no small amount. So yes, and what SEBI has said, and this will go into effect by end of Jan, that the financial sector has to separate itself from all influencers. So अभी जो affiliate links चल रहे हैं, other kinds of promotions, brand deals, all of that has to stop according to the regulator. So now Mr. Hegde has a problem because he himself is an influencer and he himself has a regulated entity that he controls. So a lot of things will change in the next few months.
So even people like Ankur Wariku got wrapped on the knuckle, so it was thanks to such things?
Yes, I don't think it directly got wrapped, but what happened with a lot of them is that their financial backers sort of took a step back because they realized that SEBI was keeping a watch on them and they couldn't go around funding people who were saying stuff that could cause people to lose money.
Now, talking about influencers, of course, the 6 million is a huge mark, but just for people who don't know, on LinkedIn he has close to 1.25 lakh followers, and on Twitter he has close to 80,000 followers last month. So,
thank you.
So how does life change for you when you have these many people? I mean, obviously there's a lot of responsibility.
I just wanted to add, please follow me on Instagram because there I only have 5,000 followers. But
and you don't get paid for every additional follower.
Unfortunately. In fact, when I put out the Sri Lanka post, I got comments saying that are you sponsored by Sri Lanka Tourism? And I was like, I wish they had taken note of me and paid me. But no, on a serious note, it's a two-edged sword. So you lose some of your privacy. You get sometimes sucked into political controversies that you have nothing to do with. The whole, I mean, again, taking that example, the Goa versus Southeast Asia thing that's been erupting. I said nothing about Goa, but I got comments saying कि आप खुद के कंट्री के बारे में क्यों नहीं लिख रहे हो? So.
Okay. But how do you then positively use this fan base? I mean, is your motto just education, or like we are saying, making personal finance easy?
My hope is that people will rely on good, credible sources of information, and that includes traditional media, that includes the old-fashioned newspaper. It tends to be boring, we don't dance around, we don't do skits, but we try our best to be more accurate, we try our best to be as balanced as possible.
But I'm not even talking of fake news versus true news. I mean, even Hegde's of the world are not fake news. But as a layman, how do you differentiate what is right, what is being influenced, what is being sponsored versus somebody as genuine as you? How does a layman influence to make decisions related to, say, my investment or anybody's here's investment in terms of personal finance?
No, that's a very good question, because what has happened with traditional media as well, both TV and what you can say digital, as in the online websites of many publications, is the attraction of clickbait. So even there you will see 10 things to do to get rich by the age of 35. and I don't have it in my power to stop it. But all I can say is that the value usually resides behind a firewall. So in Mint, our best content is behind a firewall, and that also goes for most of the big publications today in India.
But does that become a deterrent for most of the people?
Unfortunately, yes.
Using firewall or paywall?
Paywall.
Paywall,
Now we don't charge that much, 3,000 rupees a year. Of course, there will be retail investors who can't afford that also, and unfortunately, they are not being served. But at least for large sections of India's middle class, it is available. If you pay a little bit, you do get access to well-researched news that is not ad funded, that is funded by you. So we have an incentive to make sure that you keep subscribing.
And how do you then respond to, I'm sure because of these followers, people write to you, DM you or whatever, or put public posts. Not everything would be positive, like you said, got trolled because of kind of things. So how do you respond as a positive, responsible influencer? How do you respond to such posts or events or things like that?
So I'm lucky because I write about finance, and finance has not so far been as controversial as politics. Like, had I been a political journalist, I don't know how they do that. There's a massive amount of pressure on them. So I get some adverse comments now and then. Again, going back to my post on Sri Lanka, somebody said you've done horrible videos, you can't shoot properly. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not a photographer.
Okay. Now let's come to the personal finance part of it. Alluding to a famous TV commercial these days, market में क्या चल रहा है, फॉग चल रहा है, तो market में क्या चल रहा है आजकल?
So most of you would have noticed that the market is down 10% after a long time, long boom. And the fund that I invest in the most, thankfully, has held its ground. I just tweeted about that, I think today itself. Because that's when you get the benefit of what I would consider sober investments. Like normally in bull markets, everything flies. You buy a random stock, it goes up 3 times, and people start thinking they're Einsteins. And this is when you see kind of the separation of frauds from real value.
Talking of that, I bring you to 2 instances where Yamaha showroom got oversubscribed God knows how many times, and Hyundai just about managed to cover its kind of thing. What's going on?
Yeah, so those of you who've been tracking the SME IPO space, it's been crazy. I mean, that index went up 10 times in 1 year. Part of it is because of the rules that govern SME IPO subscription, where you get a higher allotment, or your chances of an allotment increase if your subscription size increase, if you subscribe for a higher amount. That is not true of a main board IPO, because there it's a lottery system. So some of it is built into the mechanism of it, and some of it is pure manipulation. Within SME IPO, promoters are, many of them, hand in glove. It's pure manipulation.
But is SME IPO a wrong decision then? I mean, SME index allowing small SMEs to sort of list, was it a wrong decision, or some correction has to be done from the government SEBI side?
No, I think it was the right decision from the country's point of view. You need to have small companies being able to raise money, but they should have a more robust system for vetting prospectuses. Like, for example, SME IPOs only needed exchange approval, not SEBI approval. So maybe you could build in an additional check where SEBI itself randomly picks up prospectuses and says, maybe there's some issue here.
And without getting into the personal issues of the SEBI chief, what's your view on SEBI?
So I think among India's regulators, it has actually done quite a good job. So let me contrast it with the insurance regulator, IRDA. I would wager that most people in this room would have at some point or the other had somebody approach them from insurance trying to missell a policy.
All of them.
Yeah, and that includes me. And IRDA has allowed this to go unchecked for years and years. No matter how much pressure is put, no matter how many articles written, I asked the finance minister in a public event this question, and she just sort of said, yes, we know, we'll look into it. Nothing happened. because the commissions there are insane, 30-35% of first year premium. Of course, you will have mis-selling. So compared to that, SEBI has done quite a good job, and they listen to the industry, they listen to the public. They have a lot of committees where they invite people from the private sector. I've served on a few of them. So SEBI's done, I think, a reasonably good job. Of course, there are some areas where they can work on, but overall, I would say.
So one of the better managed regulators.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when I was in a business school studying, there were companies like Asian Paints and kind of thing, and these were like stars from a corporate career perspective as well as from a stock market perspective. And now what's happening? For these kind of companies, Asian Paints, and these are not doing well, markets are doing well.
So I don't want to comment on a specific company, but I will point to what happened pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, the market breadth in 2019 to let's say early 21 was getting very narrow. Like a few companies were doing extremely well, mid and small caps were not actually, now that you think about it. And so a lot of the famous fund managers who focus on this philosophy that a few companies are going to just amass most of the profits. The most famous exponent of that is Saurabh Mukherjee of Marcellus. He has this philosophy of coffee can investing. They did extremely well in that period. Among the mutual funds, for example, Axis Mutual Fund had this style. It's called growth investing or quality investing, which again picked up these quality companies even if they were expensive, on the belief that no, they will compound their earnings at good 25-30% for a long time to come. Then the pandemic happened and suddenly the market shifted. And a lot of the companies that did not fall into this growth filter, think of PSUs. PSUs have single digit earning growth, they are boring, they were cheap, they exploded massively. And maybe we have come to an end in that cycle. So maybe there is a slight shift back to growth or quality. But again, Asian Paints, I wouldn't want to comment.
Yeah. But without naming the company, I'm saying good companies are not doing well in spite of the market doing well. So is there any underlying story behind that?
I think in every cycle there are left behind companies. There are companies that never bounce back. If you think of the Sensex or Nifty in the 1990s, you had a lot of PSU names, MTNL for example. Now where is it? You had a lot of Anil Ambani group companies in the mainline indices. They never bounced back. You had Yes Bank, where is it now? So there are these stories that never really recover.
Okay. Now, one more thing is in terms of that there are students here, young people here, very 3-4 generations sitting in the room. Now, from a personal finance investment perspective, what would be your investment advice? Not obviously in terms of what to buy and sell, I know, but for a first jobber, for somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and somebody who's now in retirement kind of thing, how would the investment outlook change, or more importantly, how should it change?
So when you are young and in your first job, you can afford to take a lot of risk. You can afford to experiment. Even if you lose all your capital, it's going to be a small part of your overall corpus when you retire. So you can start investing in equity early, and even if the market goes down, you're okay. You have decades to go to recover that money. As you age, as you get into your 30s, you have all these family responsibilities, expenditures, and by then you've already built up some savings. So that appetite, सब कुछ try कर सकते हैं, penny stock try कर सकते हैं, small cap try कर सकते हैं. That has to be pulled back a little, and pulled back further as you get older and older. Now, coming to the question of retirement, and this is a heated debate in personal finance.
Yeah.
How much corpus do you need to retire, right? All of us have this at the back of our minds, young or old. For young people, it is FIRE, financial independence, retire early. For old people, it's just retirement. Now, the traditional answer that comes from US data is something called the 4% rule, that you need to have 25 times your annual expenses in order to retire. That will last for a 30-year period. On the growth of the corpus, what kind of returns it will fetch. It takes into account the inflation. Every year, your spending will keep going up, and roughly that's the amount that you need at the age of 60. Now, question is, what if you want to retire at 50 or 40, right? The whole fire dream. What is the math behind that? Now, here is where the influencer thing again came in. A lot of these guys put out videos saying, "Nahi, nahi, 25 times is enough up. It's so much that doesn't matter. Any age you can retire." And that they just extrapolated the returns of the past 3 years or 5 years and said, look, if the stock market is going to give you 15% each year and inflation is 6%, then you can just pocket the difference and live like a king. Now, we, in our article on this, we spoke to India's only published paper, like the author of it, who's a SEBI registered investment advisor, Ravi Sarogi, and he's run simulations, he's run the numbers, taking into account different kinds of markets. So I'll give you guys a question. Which was the worst decade in India's stock market? Does anyone know? If you had to pick a 10-year period, what was that 10-year period?
93 to 2003.
Yeah, exactly. 1993 to 2003, because that was the top of the Harshad Mehta bull market. And in that decade, what was the return of the stock market? 7, 8, no. It was zero. I mean, I'm excluding dividends, but the market was flat. So you can have an entire decade where the market gives you no returns. You can have a situation like 2008 when the market crashed by 50%, 50. We can't even imagine it. We can't even comprehend it unless we've lived through it. So when you take those periods into account, 25 times does not hold if you're retiring early. Then the rule of thumb is that it has to be a multiple of the number of years you have to live. So let's assume that you want to retire at 30. You made it in life, right? And you're going to live until the age of 90. So that's 60 years to live. That's 60 years of retirement. How much of a corpus do you need? And the math works out that you need 60 times. It's the number of years, that many times corpus you need.
Okay.
And the reason why it works out that way is because, roughly, rule of thumb, it is assumed that the inflation is cancelling out the growth of your corpus. It's a very conservative assumption. Most people assume that you will have positive returns. So that is the math that we've kind of worked with Ravi on, and we have an event we'll talk about. He's coming to present at that event, but
It's next Friday?
yes, on 22nd.
Yeah.
Yes, in Mumbai. But this is, I mean, before jumping into fire, this is the kind of thing that you should really think through and look for the rigorous sources.
So that's a Neil formula. How many years till you think you will die? In those many years is the multiple.
This is the Ravi Sarogi formula.
Okay.
In media, we just borrow other people's thoughts. We have no original thoughts.
Okay, so let me take a pause here and ask if anybody has a question. Before you ask any question, be very clear. He's not going to answer any questions in terms of should I buy, should I sell this stock, that stock. So anybody has a question? Yes, please. Is there a mic here? Or you can shout, I think. Yeah.
I'm Rohit Bakshi, and I'm also connected to Neil on VET, and we have very constructive arguments also. So how are they different in their bias vis-a-vis or maybe a MFD? So how are they really going to add value? But they are also going to earn income from their own distribution now.
So first, let me explain to everyone here who doesn't know what an RIA is. So RIA stands for Registered Investment Advisor. Registered as in with SEBI Registered Investment Advisor. Now there are only 1,300 of these on paper in our country, which is nowhere. Even if you take just the investors of our country, like 10 crore, how can they possibly be served by 1,300 people? And the reason why this profession is so small, and I think of it as parallel to medicine, right? My parents are both doctors, And the way I think of finance is that you should be served by individuals who you pay a fee to. They give you advice. There are no conflicts of interest. But that is not how the industry is currently structured. The vast majority of people are serviced by bank relationship managers, agents, mutual fund distributors, and it's not that everyone who's not an RI is bad and only RIs are good. There are good people across different professions. But I've always tried to advocate for RIs because I think that is where we should eventually get to. That is where the industry and India should eventually get to. And now SEBI has made life slightly easier for RIs also. They've allowed distributors to also become RIs. So you can have both. You can have high net worth clients who you charge fees to. You can have retail clients who you take commission from. And I hope that the market evolves that way.
So for people who don't know, how do you become RI?
So again, this is something that SEBI has proposed to loosen, thankfully. Earlier, you needed something called a postgraduate degree in particular subjects, economics, finance, accountancy, and you needed to pass 2 exams, NISM 10A, 10B. Now SEBI has proposed we'll just make it graduation in certain subjects. And of course, the exam stays, but they are looking also at maybe slightly making it easier. So that's how you become an RIA. And RIA is only allowed to charge fees, not take commission on any product. And that is what removes the conflict of interest. They are not affected by the commission that they get.
But that was my exact question. That a lot of them do have this Chinese wall and they are earning. So that conflict of interest is still there. But you have been very vocal. I have been equally vocal when I replied to you. So then how does it matter? If they are also doing the same thing, actually they are charging twice.
So again, in any profession, there are black sheep who do stuff that isn't meant to be the spirit of the regulation. But what SEBI has now envisaged is that as long as you have separate clients, so you have client A who you charge a fee to, and you have client B who you take a commission from, no problem. That's officially allowed. Now there will be people who will be having client A and charging them both commission and fee. I agree, but I mean there are black sheep in all professions.
Anybody else? Yeah, Om.
There's a distinguishing factor. So any individual cannot be an RI and a MFD. A non-individual with a net worth of 50 lakhs plus can become an RI and a MFD because they have a separation, legal entity separation. That's the only.
Yes, and thankfully SEBI proposed to bring that 50 lakhs down to 10 lakhs. So a lot of individuals now can easily corporatize and have both.
Yeah. We'll go here first. Yeah.
We're discussing outside. What's your view on the index funds? And how do you see the number of index funds are now coming, index funds and ETFs especially? And what's the creation of index per se?
So again, let me explain this to people who don't know what an index fund is. An index fund only seeks to track an index, like the Nifty or Sensex. It doesn't try to beat the index. And popularized by John Bogle, as we discussed, in the United States, who figured out that because there are so many people trying to compete with each other and beat and build funds, they're not actually able to beat the index. So it's just cheaper to actually buy the index rather than trying to beat it. Now, question is, what does the data say about India? So again, the academic guide to this is the SPIVA report, the S&P Dow Jones versus active funds report. And the SPIVA report shows that in the large cap space, most active funds are being beaten by the index. So their index funds to me make a lot of sense. Mid and small caps, it's still a 50-50 game. So there you can have active mid and small cap funds.
Sudarshan?
So the question I have is, when we think of regular publications around personal finance, right, which are the top 3 or 4 that get published? So I was trying to look for them. So I know there is ET Wealth that happens, right? But which are the other 2 or 3 that you think are worthwhile investing or subscribing to on a regular basis?
Yes, you're right. So ET Wealth is the other big one other than Mint. And the third one that I personally hold a lot of respect for is Value Research and its magazine. So it has Mutual Fund Insight and Wealth Insight. And anything on their website.
On Sunday.
Yes.
Business line on Sunday.
Yes, Hindu Business Line on Sunday also is quite good.
So does Mint have any particular day of the week? Because the Mint that we get on a Saturday That's not really.
Yeah, that's Mint Lounge. That's the cultural section.
This is Monday to Friday personal page.
Monday to Friday पैसे कमा लो और weekend पे कहाँ party करना है.
So your subscription starts on 18th. Anyone else? Yeah.
What are your views on small cases vis-a-vis mutual funds?
Okay, so again, people who don't know what is a small case, this is a fintech which allows you to buy baskets of stocks. It's like a mutual fund, but it's not got that structure. So you click a button and it automatically you get a portfolio of stocks. Now, the first problem with small case, in my view, is that when, and by the way, these are run by professional investment advisors or research analysts. So the first problem is that when the owner of the small case, the advisor, rebalances the small case, you might not exactly be able to replicate that rebalance because you might not be accessible. You might be on holiday in the Himalayas, or you might be just not able to get that price. It might be a small cap stock. That's one issue. Second issue, and this issue I have with direct stock investing in general, is one of taxation. So when you buy and sell stocks, every single time you book profits, you incur capital gains tax. And as you would have followed, our brilliant finance minister likes to increase it every few years. So now we're sitting at 12.5% long-term capital gains tax. Whereas in a mutual fund, you can have that rebalancing inside the fund, but you don't pay any tax until you redeem the fund. And also dividends in direct stocks, you get dividends, you are fully taxed at your slab rate. Mutual funds, growth plans, again, that dividend just adds to the NAV, but you are not taxed. So that I think is the second issue. The third is about past performance. So in case of mutual fund, it's an audited NAV. Like that NAV, they have to have it accurate because people buy and sell at that NAV. Here, that past performance is according to what that fintech is displaying, and there are no SEBI rules on this. There's a committee, by the way, a performance validation committee, but that report is not out, so it's a bit of a grey zone.
Yeah, you mentioned that SEBI is relatively a good regulator in India. Kind of, I agree to a certain extent. But when it comes to things like insider trading, the rules which we have, like for example, this Rakesh Jhunjhunwala heard of something in the tech case and got rid of it. Mr. Dilip Shanghvi of Sun Pharma did something, got rid of it. Mr. Gupta, of head of McKinsey, he went inside the jail because he was in US for 4 years because it harms the interest of the retail investors. The big fishes can get away with it by paying some money in India, but ultimately the retail investor loses out on this. So can SEBI be strict on this? Can there be a law where we put people behind bars for insider trading? Just your thoughts.
So I think on the investigation side, they have improved a lot. Their algorithms are able to catch things like the Axis Mutual Fund front-running scenario. Where they flounder is on the enforcement side. So after an investigation, SEBI has to pass an order, and that order gets appealed to the SAT, Securities Appellate Tribunal, and there if you have good enough lawyers, you are able to get a stay or get it reversed. So ultimately very few people go to jail. In fact, I don't think anyone has gone to jail in India for, as far as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, for insider trading. Of course, other than Harsha, I mean that's a separate level. But at least the minor stuff doesn't seem to attract it. But I hope something that they'll work on.
Yeah.
How much influence you think AI will have on your
So the question was how much influence AI will have on my field. Massive, because AI, especially in content, is able to write, quite well. But I think one area of journalism which AI can never really replicate is a lot of our information comes from just human interaction. Dozens and dozens of meetings with lots of people. So I hope that my job will be secure at least until my retirement.
Yeah, Suhas, I'll come back to you.
One is you told 90 to 2000 was a very bad era of Indian
Yeah, 93 to 2003. Yeah.
As per my knowledge, it started in 91 and so far we are. When the Reliance Zero Company started to take over, even that is clear. And for that time,
So what is your question?
question is, what are the parameters affecting that time, the share market, that decade, and how much government and policy makers are interested in this to close all the process?
So how much have government and policymakers fixed things from that decade?
Business politics influence on policy making.
The direct impact on the share market, government, policy makers, and investors.
How much do they directly influence the share market? Is
How they impact?
how they impact. So
Tricky question.
I would run into political waters right away if I were to answer that question.
So you got the answer. Yeah.
We had enough discussion on the influencers. So I wanted to know about the TV anchors. They are giving some calls every day, and huge amount of people they are watching me and so many people. So how it goes, that TV influencer?
Yeah, so I have a confession to make. In the early part of my life, I once thought that what if you follow them, you'll actually make money. So like I used to get up in the morning and 9:30 CNBC, whatever he says, buy it, and whenever he says sell it and make losses eventually. So I've been through that cycle.
Udayan book Vijay or after that?
Many of them.
Okay.
After that, actually. After
that. Now you mentioned about the question about AI, and you mentioned that what will sort of work in your favor is human interaction. So my question is, obviously you would meet a large number of people. So who was the most difficult interview you've had? Tell us some story behind that.
Sitaraman was a surprise actually, because I thought she would yell at me and थोड़ी डांट पड़ेगी कि तुम क्या पूछ रहे हो, because she had just yelled at my boss. My boss had asked her the prior question, but she was unusually kind. So probably difficult from an emotional standpoint was our interview with a gentleman called Naveen Fernandez, who is suffering from stage 4 cancer. So we had to ask him about his money, how he is dealing with the finances in this last part of his life. Was he able to pay for the cancer treatment? How does he invest his money? Did he get insurance? And one thing that we discovered is that his Provident Fund money was stuck. 19 lakhs of it was stuck, and even though he was dying, they were still not giving it to him. That is the heartlessness of our bureaucracy. And probably the greatest achievement in my career has been getting the EPFO to release that money to him.
Wow.
So that was difficult, but you can see the whole interview. It's on YouTube. We've also done a story on it. But he's a man of enormous courage. He's not let the cancer get to him.
Okay. Quite an emotional thing. And who was the tough nut to crack?
So one question that I'll just answer this and we'll come.
Yeah.
There's one interesting story that I did some years ago in 2019. So as most of you know, there's a lot of mis-selling in insurance. Now, one particularly rampant case of this was what was happening in Rajasthan. A lot of farmers were going to an insurance company, ICICI Prudential, and they were going to the bank actually, ICICI Bank, and they were making FDs, or they thought they were making FDs. And turns out that they were being sold insurance policies. So the next year they would get calls from the bank saying कि इस साल का premium भरो, नहीं तो पिछला वाला चला गया. That is how it normally operates, right? And one of the employees of ICICI Prudential, Mr. Balchandani, he developed a conscience, and he said, "I've had enough of this." He quit, and he said, "I am now going to dedicate my life to getting people's insurance money back." So what did ICICI do? They filed a case on him for data theft. How did he find out who are our customers? That was their contention. And he went to jail for some months in that case. He got bail, he came out, and he filed counter cases. He filed a PIL also in Rajasthan High Court. And a time came some years after that when a warrant was issued against the CEO of ICICI Bank. That is when it made the national headlines. It came to my notice, and we covered it despite enormous pressure from different people. Uh, and we kind of amplified that story. Hopefully, it made some difference somewhere, but at least we were able to tell the story.
So, without going back to my earlier question, since you mentioned this, if you can answer that question, where does the buck stop when there is this kind of pressure?
So thankfully, in big organized media, there's enough heft, enough size to counter some amount of pressure. If I were by myself, probably Rozi Roti ka sawal hai, I would have probably kept my mouth shut. But my salary is going to come regardless of my criticism of ICICI or anybody else. So there is that security still in old-fashioned journalism. It's not gone away. I have not had the advertising department come to me even once in my tenure in Mint saying that तुम ये लिखोगे तो हमारा बंद हो जाएगा, मत लिखो.
Wow.
That is still there.
That's credible. Yeah. Okay. Now going back to my question, who was the toughest nut to crack in an interview? Didn't open up or was very nasty or whatever?
No, didn't open up is a lot of people because they are very terrified ki what will our compliance department say, our corporate. So I can't pinpoint a specific one, but I think a couple of questions are pending.
Okay.
Shall
Oh,
we
yeah.
There first. And then-
Yeah. I'll come to you. Yeah.
Can you please let us know the robo-advisors impact in personal finance industry? What do you think it's maybe more into positive side or negative side? How the AI will actually hamper the job opportunities or the professionals who are already in the
Robo-advisor.
So I think largely it can and will be positive because AI will do the groundwork, the grunt work, the crunching of a lot of data and coming up with research. If you are to digest an entire annual report of 50 pages, AI will give you a summary in 5 minutes. In fact, I recently tried Google's
Gemini.
No, not Gemini. There is this new thing they've launched which also does podcasts. Like you give it a script. Notebook, yes, Notebook 11. So that is really great for that kind of work. And what AI cannot displace is again the same thing it can't displace in my profession, which is that, human interaction.
Yeah, just one second.
Sorry, just a bit on the personal side. From a lawyer to a financial analyst, is there any one thing कि काश मैं ये करता तो और मजे आते?
नहीं, काश मैं लॉ करता. I would have got so. मैं इतने फीस कमाता. Journalists don't get paid much.
And the follow-on to that, what next for Neil Gorate?
I'm happy where I am. I'm happy doing the stories that I do. So I hope to be a journalist in this field for a long, long time to come.
All the best. Okay, keep writing. Thank you.
I would have a question on a lighter note. Will you give advice on how to get money released from EPFO for our employees? Money is stuck and they are struggling with it actually.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Every time we do a story on EPFO, we get at least 50 comments saying that हमारा ये हुआ, हमारा वो हुआ. And nobody seems to have a solution. Like even I try to look for people who are specialists in that and who I can direct people to कि आप यहाँ पे जाओ और ये बंदा आपका solve करेगा. I haven't yet found somebody who is that good because the bureaucracy is just so mind-numbingly Byzantine. And the only solution that we can all do is exert some pressure, like just raise our voices, and hopefully at some point they'll dismantle that system.
Last question. Yeah.
Just one question. Hindenburg, so he's a journalist, very well written articles, very well published cases. I actually, being a chartered accountant, I cross-checked a few things. They were all, to a certain extent, correct. What do you have to say? And when will this sort of stuff happen? When will the Indian journalists get panged to do this sort of thing?
Yeah, so you're right, Hindenburg, at least the first report was quite well researched. Yeah. So in terms of Indian journalists, there are a few that do have, even today, the strength. The Sucheta Dalal, who exposed, is still very much active and still writes a lot of stuff. I like to think that at Mint we are at least in some areas, quite vocal and able to say things. Even in case of Hindenburg, we had some columns that did raise our voices. But I mean, the system as a whole, we know there are issues. So that is not in our hands.
So I think we've run out of time. So one final question, going back to what he said, since you mentioned that you're happy where you are. So who's your idol in terms of financial journalism? Whom do you want to be like?
Probably Dhirendra Kumar. I think he's led the way, shown the path. I'd very much like to be.
Wow. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Bonatto. So, just a small token of appreciation. So, since this is a book-based event, so book from our side. Hopefully you like it. Thank you so much. Sanma? This is a perfume by
Oh, nice.
Pune-based perfumery called a fragrance story.
Acha,
Yeah.
acha.
They do very personalized kind of things.
Fantastic.
This is as many of you know, perfume from a Pune-based perfumery, our gift partner, called a fragrance story. So that's for him. I'll invite Dr. Sanmat. This is from IMDR.
Thank you.
And last but not least, you can keep it here. So from Doubletree Hilton. So they are our gift partners.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I saw many of you have bought the book, so I'm sure he'll take some time to sort of autograph in case you need. I'm sure he'll be happy to do that. So thank you once again for spending your Friday evening here. Our next event is going to be on 20th December. It's going to be in Bhau Institute, and it's going to be on startup funding called Funding Fundas. Yeah. So we'll have again a lovely, this time it's a standard kind of thing, book summary and a panel discussion. We have 4 panelists this time. So hope to see you again on 20th December. Till then, thank you so much. Have a good evening. And in case anybody who's new wants to be part, we have a WhatsApp community called Between the Lines. It's a community, so nobody gets to post messages, no good morning, no good afternoon. Only message from me 6 days before the event, and a couple of reminders. In case you are interested in joining the community and therefore attending future events, let me know I'm around. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.